The MLB draft is in our rearview mirror, and the prospect lists are ever evolving. So, to talk about all of this, we've got Eric Longenhagen of Fangraphs to talk about Twins prospects and the draft. This is Locked On Twins.
You are Locked On Twins, your daily Minnesota Twins podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello again, and welcome back to Locked On Twins. I'm your host, Brandon Warren, and you can find me on Twitter, though I don't think I would, at Brandon_WARNE. Thanks for making Locked On Twins your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube. So if you're watching us on YouTube, that's exciting as well. And so, of course, we are also part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Also, please be active in the comments on YouTube. We've had some great comments here on recent shows. And also, too, if you have questions, just shoot them to me on Twitter at LockedOnTwins, at Brandon_Warren. Hit the DMs, whatever you wish. Also, Twins breathless post-game minutes. We talk about things that you may not hear anywhere else, including a stat at the end of each one that you won't hear anywhere else. Twins 11-1 in their last 12 against the Diamondbacks. That was the stat yesterday. So the Twins play the Tigers at Comerica Park on Monday. That's later today if you're listening when this comes out, 5:40 p.m. Pablo Lopez and Joey Wentz. Joey Wentz, the lefty, looking like a good chance for Jordan Luplow to get his first start as a Twin. But if you want to catch every pitch of the Twins' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM, just use the SXM app and search Twins. All that fun stuff out of the way. Got it in under 2 minutes, though. I'm pretty proud of that. We have Eric Longenhagen on the horn. How we doing, man?
I'm doing good. I'm in like that post-draft, post-deadline headspace where there's like room for stuff. There's not a predetermined. Your day is packed of stuff that you know you're going to be working on, and so it's just about like trying to recover from like list burnout and then focus that energy into like productive stuff rather than like existential dread and whatever else might creep into your head when it's, you know, like you've created a ton of space for thought and now there's nothing to like work on. So, but it's been good. It's super hot here in Arizona and it's not gonna quit. So I've like been doing less complex stuff here the last couple of weeks than I ordinarily would, just because it's like been over 110 every day since the start of July.
Yeah, you and I actually met in person in Arizona at the Fangraphs get together. I'm trying to recall if it was 14 or 15. All I remember
probably 15 because I only moved here the summer of 2014 and wasn't part of Fangraphs officially until 16, and it was probably a little bit before that. Yeah, before. So maybe it was the fall of 2014.
Well, and so I know the reason I remember is because we went to a Diamondback spring training game and they had their new third baseman that they had signed, whose name is escaping me now, from Cuba. I think it was Cuba.
Oh, yeah. Yasmani Tomas.
Yasmani Tomas. Yep. We were seeing Tomas play. It had to have been 2015 because he wasn't on the 2014 team. So anyhow, yeah, Yasmani Tomas, we got to watch. And then we also got to play a little wiffle ball. I have to say wiffle ball I say this with endearing terms, nerds from Fangraphs, was actually a lot of fun until I came up last at bat of the game and they brought in a lefty specialist by the name of Jeff Sullivan to try to get me out. And I rolled a single through the infield. And I think we were on the same team. I think we were playing the outfield and I walked it off. So I got that on Jeff Sullivan, even though, you know, he works for a big league team and all that.
Yes, he does. Yeah. It's funny. It's like Sullivan, when you work at Fangraphs, we're not all housed together, right? We all are spread out across the country working remotely. And so it can be hard to get to know your coworkers in the same way that you would when you were like working in an office together. And there are a couple of them who, since they left for big league teams, like I've weirdly gotten to know them better than when they were my coworker. Sullivan's not necessarily one of those guys. It's funny. Like I know more Rays scouts well than I do like know Jeff Sullivan well. And so getting to know what he does for them through those scouts is like, it's been pretty interesting. Basically does what he did for Fangraphs, except for the Rays.
Wow.
He's like writing for a staff of a couple dozen people rather than the whole internet. So that's what the Rays got. They just like literally bought Jeff Sullivan straight up, like whatever he did, like didn't have to change. He just gets to live, at home in the Northwest and write for the Rays now, basically.
And you almost had a Freudian slip there and said Jeff Fangraphs. I think it'd be like Johnny Football. Jeff is the face of Fangraphs, although I think Dave Cameron might have had something to say about that. But
For sure.
How did you get into doing this sort of work? I mean, obviously, there's a lot of people who are interested in minor leagues and even the amateur side of things. And the problem is people don't want to do it for money reasons or because it's a grind or just because you have to be a good evaluator to get in these positions. But how did it all come together for you?
There were definitely some stages, some like lucky breaks here and there. I've, from a young age, and we're talking like 12, 13, 14, especially in that corridor, I became very interested in the NFL draft and, prospect type stuff. And, just have like notebooks and notebooks of like, some of which I can remember in like weirdly shocking detail, like virginal detail. And, like preseason notes on Jesse Chapman from like football games and stuff, just like unbelievably nerdy stuff. And then, what I really wanted to do was not clear to me until my freshman year of college, the summer after the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs, the Phillies AAA affiliate, that became a thing. They were the Scranton Wilkes-Barre Red Barons before that. And then for a year, like the Ottawa Lynx, the old International League team, the Ottawa Lynx. And then a brand new ballpark in Allentown, PA, like literally 10 minutes from the front door where I grew up in Catasauqua, had its inaugural season. So I was 19. I, charmed the people who were hiring interns in the room, even though I was like technically younger than what they were looking for. And I like became the youngest intern of the Lehigh Valley Iron Pigs, like first year of operations. And it was, it was sort of just the fact that I started that young was very lucky and advantageous. And I was there for a couple of years, basically making $25 a day. Again, like super lucky that I got to just live in my childhood home.
Right.
Work was right there. And I was a pretty lousy usher or ticket taker or whatever I had to do that day. Most days I was pretty bad at it, but like I had a little pocket notebook and a stopwatch and was like going to work early and chatting up the scouts. And some of those folks I still know to this day, like Eric Valent was with the Phillies at the time and is now
former catcher, Marlins.
Right? No, like infielder, utility infielder.
Why am I thinking of him as a catcher?
I don't know.
That's weird.
Yeah, he's one of those guys who has like fewer than 600 career plate appearances, I think. Even though he like played in the big leagues for like over the course of 4 or 5 years or whatever.
Probably an immaculate grid kind of guy.
Yes, definitely. So just some of those people were around, Mike Ondo and, Ruben Amaro, and just coming through the affiliate. And when you knew who they were as a, 19-year-old kid, they didn't totally ignore you. It'd be weird for a 33-year-old man to be like, oh yeah, like, how's it going? Yeah, all right, Pat Gillick, cool. Oh.
Right.
But at the time it was charming.
Yeah.
And then Baseball Info Solutions, which is now Sports Info Solutions, became a thing also within like 10 minutes of my childhood home, literally in a building that my grandparents used to like. It used to be a movie theater. They moved Baseball Info Solutions into, and my grandparents like saw movies there back when, these 1 or 2 room movie houses were a thing in Copley, Pennsylvania. And so again, just like was there for like a year and a half, got to know a bunch of people, and just be totally immersed in baseball all day in like a totally new way. And it really was helpful to see Major League Baseball and AAA baseball and kind of see where that line was. And it was at that point when I started writing and started like really going to minor league games pretty intensely, like in my car driving, round trip to wherever, Lakewood or Wilmington or Aberdeen or Harrisburg, whatever, wherever the primo matchup was, Dylan Bundy versus Giordano Ventura in Wilmington, and then drive home to Lehigh Valley and see old Mark Pryor for Pawtucket, at Lehigh Valley that night. Like,
yep,
just crazy, crazy stuff. And grinding and then running into people who would later be my mentors, whether it was, Jim Callis, Keith Law, Jason Gray, who's a scout with the Rays now, but used to write at ESPN.com. Just people who would see you at the field, amateur scouts and stuff. Gosh, Matt Bowman, I saw at Princeton and met a bunch of scouts there. I was so young. And Mike Ford was on the field, but I definitely did not notice him. Matt Bowman for sure I noticed, but not Mike Ford.
Bowman's the one that became a reliever for the Cardinals?
Yes, he played shortstop and then pitched. There was a doubleheader. I don't even remember who they played, but yeah, one game he played shortstop and hit like second or third, and the other game he pitched. And it was just like, wow, this guy's kind of special.
I was bound to get one of my guesses right too.
Yeah, yeah. But
not Eric Valent, but we'll take it.
But yeah, so things just sort of transpired in a way that, I feel lucky and, super duper grind and try to have the most thorough and accurate representation of like pro scouting department prospect coverage that I can at the site for just like basically doing it on my own as like a thank you to the universe for handing me the job that I wanted when I was 16 years old.
Oh, that makes sense. So one thing we do on this show at the end of every segment is we do Twins 1 year ago, 10 years ago, and 20 years ago. 1 year ago today, the Twins lost 3-2 at Target Field. And the funny thing about this is the last day, August 7th of last year, that the Twins held first place solely. They had it again in, the next game. They stayed tied because they lost also again to this time it was to the Dodgers. And then a month later, early September, they were tied. But this was the last day last year that the Twins held first place. And right now they're looking like they might hang on to it. Now, quickly, before we get to our second segment, we do have to talk about Dave. And if you're wondering who Dave is, it's because it's one of our sponsors. It is a banking app that has leveled the financial playing field. When you download Dave, you can get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. No credit check, no late fees, and it's all a part of Dave's extra cash account. Advance the money you need with no interest and then settle up later. So make sure you download Dave today at dave.com/MLB. That's dave.com/MLB. And you could get up to $500 in 5 minutes or less. There's no credit check, no late fees. You can download the Dave app now or just dave.com/MLB. Now, for terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. Eligibility criteria and instant transfer fees apply. Banking services provided by Evolve, member FDIC. Now, when I think about the money that I owe, Eric, and I think of interest, like student loan interest, I have no interest in paying that back. So every time I hear loan interest, that just triggers in my brain. But
yeah, everyone within our like 10-year age window feels the same way.
Yeah, we're just kind of crumbling under it. Yeah, why aren't we buying houses and that sort of thing?
Right.
So again, thanks for making us your first listen every dayers. Make sure to check back. We are working on a few guests. Pat Light, who pitched for the Twins for a bit.
Monmouth.
Yep. One of the best high school pitchers around, I think, before he went to Monmouth, or maybe Monmouth, he had crazy records. I can't remember for sure. If I remember watching the draft highlight when the Twins traded for him, I was like, okay, what did Jim Callis say on draft night? And they were just gushing about him. It might have been at Monmouth because he was solid there too, of course. But he actually was on my old podcast, and I asked him Joe Mauer stories, because anytime you ask someone a Joe Mauer story, it's as good as gold. But nevertheless, Twins back in action. It's going to be at Comerica Park Monday, 5:40 p.m. locally. It's the Tigers, of course, Pablo Lopez and Joey Wentz. You can catch every pitch of the Twins' hometown broadcast with SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just search Twins. Now, I promised to divide this up into the draft and then prospects separately, and I'm going to do that. I'm going to do my best. But so the Twins picked 5th, and I feel like at any given moment there was like, oh, could Skeens fall here? Could Langford fall here? Then there was the chatter about, maybe the Twins don't really like Jenkins as much, or they're shying away from him, which I think is all talk. You can sort through that obviously better than I can. But one, how fortunate should the Twins feel that Jenkins was there at 5? And if any of those other guys had dropped, who do you think would have been the best fit?
Yeah, I think the fact that they were picking where they did in like a 5-player draft means that whoever was on the board, they were just going to take and be happy with in all probability. I know there was like pre-draft chatter about them discussing cutting a deal with like, Jacob Gonzalez or mostly it was around him, I think, maybe Jacob Wilson some.
Yep.
But I don't think any of that actually happened in the room. I think that some of that was like agent fabrication to try to keep someone's number fat deeper into the middle of the first round by like threatening an underslot deal at 5. And like you said, like it is so hard to parse that stuff. Part of the reason that we're able to do okay with like mocks in baseball is because of the bonus pool system, and the agent and the player have to be involved to some extent. And, so scouts and agents end up learning about negotiations in a way that like in hard slotted sports like football and basketball, like they aren't kept in the loop. They don't need to be. Like you go where you go and you get what you get monetarily, and that's that. But in the Twins case, yeah, like I'm not sure if anyone had done anything funky ahead of them and like Clark or Langford would have been there along with Jenkins at 5. I think Langford would have been a slam dunk, like compared to Jenkins. But I think if both high school hitters had suddenly been there, because all of a sudden, right before the draft, I'm sitting there like trying to get the last mock out within like an hour of the draft starting, basically. I'm still texting people feverishly. And all of a sudden, there's a weird Kyle Teal Rangers rumor.
Oh,
just totally weird. And at that point, like you get to a point where the draft is so close to occurring that stuff that you hear is mostly BS and it's smokescreen and it's not real anymore. And so like it, it just felt weird. But had that transpired and both Clark and Jenkins had been on the board, I think they would have had a brouhaha in the room about who to take. I think that would have been the toughest decision point about which of the high school hitters to take. Jenkins has hip stuff. Jenkins had like multiple sort of hip injuries and surgeries, I think, in high school. And I write about it in his scouting blurb. You don't get like super duper into the detail because it can be foggy, the information getting to you. And then it's not always necessarily like kosher for me to be like, hey, like here's this teenage boy's medical history. But also if it's going to impact, if it's, we're at a point where like, it's impacting the way this draft falls, where this guy who is a consensus top 5 talent ends up like falling in a precipitous way because of this stuff. Like it is newsworthy. And anyway, but this has been written about before, including by MLB.com, which is why we felt comfortable publishing stuff about it. But like not every team loved Jenkins' medical. And so there was a possibility that because of that, he would fall. But when you're lining up the teams who would, squash the medical, Texas at 4, who took Kumar Rocker last year, and then Minnesota at 5, which took Brooks Lee last year, neither of them are the guys who you're like, oh, yeah, they're going to whack the medical. Like, if the Mets are picking 5, then you're like, maybe he's...
They also signed Carlos Correa, so, I mean...
Right. Man, that's rough. I'm sorry about that.
It is what it is.
Yesterday, he turned on that, gallon fastball and, inner edge that I was pretty impressed by. But yeah, it's been kind of a rough look, even just kind of watching him move around. But I like Jenkins a lot, and he's been a dude since he was so young. And so I think, he's really good. But the Clark Jenkins, if they had both been on the board, I think there would have been a literal fight in the room about who to take.
I know Mike Radcliffe, before he passed away, had seen Walker Jenkins. I think Radcliffe's pretty well regarded in scouting circles, and he wrote just a glowing review on. I don't know when he would have seen him because Mike passed away a little while ago, but that might have had to be the tiebreaker, honestly, if I'm not mistaken. Wouldn't that be something if a person who passed away, their statement on a player was the deciding vote?
Yeah, geez. Yeah, I mean, I'm getting to the point now, having done this for a little over 15 years, where I know multiple people who have died, and any player who they championed who was in the org, like their spirit gets attached to that player within the org. Like, they're playing essentially as a way of keeping that person's spirit alive. It's very intense. Yeah.
What? So You had written with Keith Law before, right? Like you guys were counterparts at, was it ESPN, I think?
Yeah, Keith and I kind of traded places where I moved from north of Philly in the Lehigh Valley to Arizona around the same time when he moved from Arizona back to the Northeast. He lives in Wilmington, south of Philly.
Yep.
And yeah, we met at it was Jeff Hoffman and East Carolina at UVA. And oh my God, what's the name of the lefty? Nathan Kirby started against Jeff Hoffman, and then we both stayed the next day for Connor Jones, who the Cardinals will later draft. And we got to know each other there a little bit. And then when we flipped spots, it became advantageous for me to like be the second in command around draft coverage at ESPN.com. That was a whole experience working for the Mouse for sure.
I'm sure.
Yeah. And then being with Keith and having him like I wrote about Phil Bickford and like submitted my copy to Keith before I sent it to the editors. And there were like some nothing burger filler sentences in there. And like, Keith, let me know.
I fervently believe you need someone to tell you suck in this business when you suck. And Robert Sanchez of Fangraphs was one of those guys who just drilled me when I first started there, and I'm so much better for it.
You need someone who you trust, because the internet will feel free to tell you suck all the time.
But they may say it even if you don't suck. I mean, Keith gets comments that he sucks. Like, the guy who like everybody in the industry kind of looks up to. Yeah, he sucks too. That's cool. But the reason I asked about Keith is because I believe I saw him say that Charlie Soto maybe 10 years ago would have gone much higher due to the prototype he fits within. How do you feel about him, and what do you see? Because I know with any pitcher, there's reliever risk, but I did hear some of that with him. Where do you stand on Charlie Soto, though?
I'm not a big Charlie Soto guy. I had him, more in like a $1.5 million bonus type of bucket. I think he got
doubled that, almost
twice that. Yeah.
2.48.
Yeah, this is, the type of guy where it's big velo, and the shape of the pitch is not necessarily conducive to missing bats, even at that velocity. There are definitely guys who succeed, even though that's the case to, at least to some extent. But if you like go and look at Brewstar, Gratterall's, the results he gets with his fastball, even though it's 100 miles an hour pretty routinely,
he's striking out like 6 batters per 9. It's crazy.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly the type of thing that we're looking at here with Charlie Soto. I think, there are different components to it that teams are looking at. There's the spin axis, there's the release height, there's extension and approach angle, and all of these things sort of interplay. The spin axis doesn't necessarily interplay with some of those other things, but extension and release height and approach angle and, your arm slot are all all interplaying with one another. And sometimes I think some of that stuff can be double counted. Charlie Soto also doesn't really spin his breaking ball especially well. Okay. So it was like counterintuitive for the Twins to take him, to be honest. I was kind of surprised when they did it. I like him as certainly, like, if you're going to give $1 million to a high school pitcher, like, you got to like him. But I am definitely lower on him than a $3 million prepster.
Right.
But I wasn't a super duper fan of that pick. And their draft in general was just sort of okay for me. I mean, they got Walker Jenkins, so that's awesome. But after that, I think it was kind of a mixed bag. They've had good drafts. Povich and Festa and some of these, athletic projectable college arms. Like, I love that type of guy. And I think both of those guys are studs. Obviously, Povich is, not a Twin anymore, but they still get a feather in their cap for drafting that guy.
Right.
But like, it's been funny. They've kind of not been great at evaluating their own guys internally, I don't think. But that's a whole other matter. But like, this is more like Chase Petty is a version of this where it's like, I see why you did it, but it's not for me. I probably wouldn't be in the mix for a guy like that if I were, totally running a draft room. It's just not where I want to put $3 million. Sometimes you don't have a choice where you have the money left over,
and you get overruled too.
Right. Yeah. You have the money left over, and the guy to put the money into just doesn't exist anymore. Like when the Phillies drafted Mickey Moniak 1-1,
right,
they didn't have another pick until like the top of the second round, I don't think. And there were a bunch of teams in that comp round ahead of them. And that's where like Joey Wentz went and Kyle Muller went and like some other guys, and they had money to spend, and left for them was just like Kevin Gowdy. Like they just there wasn't really anybody to put an extra $2 million into that was awesome. So they just were like, I guess we're going to take Kevin out, and it just didn't work out.
Well, these things definitely happen. So if you look back at the Chase Petty for Sonny Gray deal, that worked out just fine for the Twins.
I think so. I mean, Sonny Gray is a damn good pitcher. He's been mostly healthy for them, and Petty's doing fine. Like, Petty hasn't, surprise, surprise, like the high school guy who's pitching once a week for 2 months in New Jersey, where he's bumping 102, he's not sitting 97 plus when you ask him to throw 100 plus innings over the course of a pro season.
Right.
Like, it's just not how this works. Almost always having physical projection as a teenage pitcher, you just hope it allows you to stem the tide of the pro workload and just hold the velo that you've had. It's rare for guys to actually add. It's like freaks like DeGrom.
Yeah.
Like, it's just freaks who do it. Like Jesus Luzardo kind of has ebbed and flowed.
Yeah.
And the fact that he's like sustained the last little bit since leaving Oakland basically like is a huge positive. He had his velo spike his senior year in high school and blew out, and then it like came back. Like Walker Buehler coming back from TJ and having a huge velo explosion is like a weird, rare thing. So most of these guys just don't really get any better, especially when it comes to the arm strength component. And Petty is definitely one of those guys where it's like low to mid 90s and he does enough other stuff that it's like, okay. But if a guy like that grows up to become Sonny Gray, like that's a huge dub. Yep. And so, yeah, you absolutely like trade your high risk prep arms when they have value, I think.
For sure. Now, before we head into our last break, Twins lost to the Royals 10 years ago today, August 7th, fell to 49-62 on the season. And I love remembering some guys. It's like my favorite thing to do. So just cherry picking. I mean, you got Chris Colabello in right field, Oswaldo Arcia in left. I thought he was going to be something. Sam DiDuno, I thought, had the nastiest stuff that he had absolutely no idea where it was going. And here you see that bullpen of the Royals lineup. And this is when they were first starting. Lewis Coleman, Tiny Tim Collins, Aaron Crow, Kelvin Herrera, and Greg Holland. I mean, all of those guys have solid numbers here. But that Royals team had to have been really interesting to watch coming up. Now, we do have to read one more spot here for BetterHelp, and it is, if you're looking for online only to talk to somebody, this is the way to go. This episode is sponsored by BetterHelp, and it's if you need someone to talk to, if you need just to kind of get some things, out of your head and talk, get feeling better about where you are in life. I've done it. I gotta be honest with you. It's great. I thought it was just words, wouldn't change anything, but absolutely tremendous. I haven't done it with BetterHelp, but I have only heard tremendous things. Now, if you are looking to start therapy, this is where you got to go. BetterHelp. It's entirely online, convenient, flexible, suited to your schedule. You just fill out a brief questionnaire. You get assigned a therapist, and you can change them anytime, no additional charge. So let therapy be your map with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnMLB today and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnMLB. Now, I want to make sure you're still doing good on time because we are constantly overriding. News just coming across. Guardians claiming Ramon Laureano. That's
whoa.
That's a pretty good pickup for them. But I thought he'd be good on the Twins. Right-handed hitter, he can play a little defense.
The A's should have traded him.
Yeah,
within the last couple of years, I think they
traded everybody else. They traded Jesus Luzardo, like we were talking about, who is a lot more of a viable prospect at any given point. Like everybody dreamed on him being a flamethrower, whereas Laureano's stock has only consistently dipped the last few years.
Yeah, since his PED suspension, really, right? Yeah,
right. Yeah, you kind of have to say that out of one side of your mouth or the other. So I'm only using the pipeline rankings for ease. It's not a slight to anybody, but they do not have Walker Jenkins in there yet. And
Oh, really?
I would assume you would have him second behind Lee, but ahead of Emmanuel Rodriguez.
Yeah. I have him 57th overall,
Okay.
second in the system. I have Festa ahead of Emmanuel Rodriguez just because
Wow.
the hit tool stuff with Rodriguez is pretty
Yeah.
rough. But yeah, I have Rodriguez just outside the top 100 because like I did entering the year.
Yeah.
And then he was hitting like $170 for the first couple of months, and that felt good. And now it's been better of late. He probably belongs in the 100. Even if he's got like a 30 hit tool, Rodriguez, the defensive piece and the OBP and power stuff, assuming that's all going to play, he's probably a 50. He's probably, in the middle of that 30,
is his
regular center fielder group.
Prospect status like similar to what Aaron Hicks was at his best, or not really?
That's an interesting comp. Yeah, man, Hicks. That would.
And I know you guys don't like comps, by the way. I will stay away from those as much as I can.
I think it's fine. Like, I think it's so useful to bounce stuff off. You just have to write about it sufficiently enough to not make the expectations on the player feel ridiculous.
Well,
but like,
and if you have somebody you say that's a Barry Bonds and they become a Bobby Bonds, that's not a bad player, but fans are going to be disappointed. You instead of having one of the greats, you have a Hall of Very Good or Ken Griffey Jr. versus Senior. The problem is that the average fan doesn't know how to temper or adjust those expectations thusly.
Yes, that is like a challenge, is like writing for Fangraphs, and a certain type of person is coming to that site most of the time.
Right.
And then trying to make the work broad enough that you can pull more casual like noobs in, while also satisfying Fangraphs readers can be difficult. So many of them are fantasy oriented, and the prospect rankings really aren't, not at my site anyway.
Right.
And, but yeah, the board is updated. Like, I don't have an arbitrary 100. I just have like guys hard ranked who meet a certain threshold of their grade, which is like 90 guys right now because of graduates falling off through the course of the season. But just because it's me and like we've got cool tech in the background that allows me to update the board and like the prospect lists in real time. Like I could make a change while we're sitting here right now.
By the way, as a non-idiot, I just went to the board because I should have been using that in the first place. Sorry about that. That was dumb.
No sweat. But yeah, like it's just much more dynamic because it's just me and not like me and Jonathan Mayo and like Sam Dykstra and like 4 other people and people who are running tech things at MLB.com who have to like make things live on the website. And, like I get to just do it. And so the drafted guys are on the list before they sign, and all the shit is updated. And it's a nice competitive edge for Fangraphs. But yeah, I like Manny Rodriguez.
How are we doing on time? I don't want to take up all your time, but
I'm doing all right. Questions. I probably got like 15 or so.
Sure. Okay. So what, instead of using a comp, if you could, in the aggregate, create what you envision Brooks Lee. So like, let's say you think he'll hit like, let's just take a random old shortstop. Pat Mears, just anybody. If you could create him in the aggregate, what do you see? Like what type of players?
Yeah, I mean, he is more of the instinctive baseball feel, viable fit at short, and like all that stuff is turned up to 10. Like this is not a traditional put his foot into the ground, monster range, huge first step shortstop. Like definitely not a Lindor type, not an Elvis Andrus, in his prime type guy. It is about feel and instincts and baseball acumen that has a way of making up for some of the physical stuff in which he lacks.
Is it like a JJ Hardy, Carlos Correa, or like, the guys that aren't traditionally fast, or
young Brad Miller? JJ Hardy's a pretty good one. Maybe Hardy was probably a little bit more twitchy, but like young Brad Miller is, I think, the body type comp. But yeah, he's just like a little bit heavy footed, but just does all kinds of stuff to make up for that. And then offensively, I mean,
you have him 10th. I didn't realize you had him as high as 10th. That's stuffed. That's on me. Yes. That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, so much of what I think is important is the defensive fit. It is just such a huge deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes, like, because so many people are interested in prospects because of fantasy baseball,
Right.
that there can be an overvaluation of prospects who are going to hit for power, like the Franmil Reyes types.
Yeah.
Like Franmil's got a couple years where he hit like 30 bombs, but because he can't play defense anywhere, he just has been DFA. Like,
Chris
so in
Carter.
like a real baseball world, he doesn't really have huge value. He's just freely available, like a couple of times.
Reminds me of Kyle Blanks, who we all kind of liked for a minute there.
Great one. Chris Carter. I mean,
Yep.
Jesus Aguilar and Justin Bohr like have made all-star teams, but they're not a 60, right? Like if I'm putting a grade on them, they're not a 60. Like they're a 40. Garrett Cooper's a 40.
Yep. It's like a prototype.
Right. So, but with Brooks Lee, it's like this guy's a fit at shortstop and then does a little bit of everything offensively. And when you start comparing the position by position baseline, like statistical baselines to one another, this is like a capital D dude.
Yes.
If he's going to be producing at 20% above league average as a shortstop, like that's a huge deal. So, his breaking ball recognition is unbelievable. It just allows him to wait an extra beat to diagnose everything.
Mm-hmm.
He's not like Wander Franco quite, because Franco and like Jose Ramirez and some of these other switch hitters like this are so compact physically and their levers are so short and they're powerful anyway, especially Jose Ramirez.
Yeah.
Where
he's got a good right hook too.
They're like, yeah, how about that? He really dropped TA, didn't he? Like that was pretty embarrassing for TA. Glassjaw now, like that's just with you forever, I think. But like having that extra beat to diagnose pitch type and either, take it or be able to adjust mid-flight to a pitch in the zone. Like Lee's got that skill. He's just not as compact as those other two dudes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not quite as advantageous, but it's still, I think, is a big deal. And so, yeah, I've got plus hit and average power on an average shortstop defender. Like it's a huge deal. And, even just looking at the leaderboard at Fangraphs for shortstops, to find guys who are about that good, it's like Xander Bogaerts. Like this season.
Is it like a souped up Jorge Polanco? I mean, Polanco is a good hit tool, I would say, but not a ton of power. I mean, in 2019, everybody was hitting those bouncy balls out of the park. But I feel like Polanco is it's a really nice player. Obviously, this is going to be higher level, but they don't blow you away tools-wise. It's not like Joey Votto homering at Target Field in 2014. It's a little different.
If you look at like, some of the less stable, good shortstops in our game are like Jeremy Pena, whose approach is awful. Willie Adames, same deal. Like way more power. Dansby's interesting. Yeah. Like,
he has warts. He has warts. It's just they're not where.
Correct. Yeah. Like Dansby's getting to enough power.
Yeah.
That even though he's punching out a slightly worse than average amount, like he's still a huge and big time impact player.
Yeah.
And has sustained that level of performance longer than Bregman, which is interesting. Those guys were in the same, the top of the same draft class.
That's right.
And then, but yeah, like you've got your Bo Bichette, and like Bichette is in a different, that's physically his talent is way bigger than Brooks Lee's. Yep. Like the bat speed piece of it is just like way bigger. But like, Bichette is chase prone, and Orlando Arcia, who's having a monster year finally after, being a chase prone problem in his early to mid 20s, as talented as he was, like he's having a big year too, but mostly like these guys all have a wart. Trey Turner's way down. Anthony Volpe, who I think is going to be great just by virtue of how much power he gets to, he's striking out almost 30% of the time. So that's not a thing I'd expect Brooks Lee to do. Like he's going to end up in this area where he's pretty, I think like looking at Bogart's line this season is a pretty good place to start for like what to expect from Brooks Lee.
Okay.
pretty generally, where there might even be more power than this. Certainly in the slug, maybe not in the home runs, but definitely in the slug.
Yep.
I think that's a pretty good place to start for him.
There's he's at AAA right now. Is there a 0% chance he plays in the big leagues this year if the Twins continue to maybe have infield issues?
I don't know. I mean, I think at some point, especially if you make the postseason, you just want your best 26 dudes up there. And I think
they brought Kirilloff up like that, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, I think that you can make a pretty good argument that he's one of your best 26 dudes.
So I've got 2 more if left if you've got time.
Yes, I do.
Which of these guys do you think is more likely to kind of pick up where they're at now and become a big league difference maker? Simeon Woods, Richardson, or Austin Martin?
Austin Martin. I think just being able to hit is just the most important thing. Yep. And he, for all his flaws, like he is very vanilla and generic in almost every other way except for his bat to ball skill. But there are enough guys who, that's for whom that's true, and they still end up being pretty good big leaguers. So
Placido, Polanco, those kind of guys, just getting to the ball and putting it in play. Guys that do that stick around for a long time.
So, yeah, I think, if he has any modicum of positional versatility at all, and, it's like he's been back in a real way for, like, I guess about a month now. There have been other issues. I know, like, when I went to Fort Myers in April, he was not ready yet. I saw Royce Lewis's first couple of rehab outings down there. I saw Ronnie Enriquez, but Martin was not ready to go yet. But like trying to watch him play defense, like that's always the key is, can you be useful on defense in a couple of places? If you're not going to be a plug and play everyday dude, which I don't think at this point, we can't expect him to be that, then you have to be able to play in a couple different spots, because part of Austin Martin's life since 2019 really has been trying to find out where he can play. And it's been hard because of the pandemic and injury. Right. We're still in that phase where we're trying to learn what that is. And hopefully it isn't just left field.
So this is a 2-part question because I never played by the rules. But if you could sell me on somebody like the lower half of your top, right now you have 39, that you think will have significant helium, let's just say in the offseason or the year from now, whatever you want to do. Who is that? And then am I to take that Junior Severino at 30 is you're not really buying into his season?
I think he's a guy with utility, but I don't think that he's like, I think he's like a dangerous switch hitting bench bat. I don't really think he's.
Is this like Jan Hervis Solarte or what?
That's an interesting one. Yeah. Like I think
he's using the Twin system and never came up. That's why I remember him.
He's like what Vogelbach is, what Ford, seriously, like that type of role where it's like dangerous power hitting situational bat that's the type of guy I think that Severino belongs as on a contending team. That's what he's doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, of the guys in the bottom of the system, I mean, I've got Byron Churio right there at 20, which is like the start of the bottom half of the system. He was the throw-in sweetener in the Pablo Lopez Arias trade.
Obviously, you think that was a pretty good trade for the Twins then.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, I certainly thought it was a good trade. As special as Arias is, if I'm scouting him, his body type and lack of athleticism does not portend longevity. I think that they got a lot back for him. I think that, the Twins certainly have been guilty of this too, but the Marlins are consistently guilty of throwing in an extra piece or two that it seems like they don't have to get a deal done. And I think this is one of those situations where they got so much back that at the time, I really liked it for the Twins as much as I think Luis Arias is like a dude. But Byron Churio, I saw him a little bit in April, 2-3 games in extended spring. And it's just, super projectable, field to hit. Let's see what happens as his body matures. There's real power projection there, I think. And so there's, big time, long-term upside for him. I love these projectable switch hitting guys who have feel for contact, and then you just hope they grow into the power. I think it's way more reasonable to expect that course of, development than it is to expect a hit tool to develop, like having the hit tool on board.
Yep.
And like physical maturation, begetting strength, that seems much more reasonable to me. So that's definitely if I had to pick a guy. And then, the one dude who I think is really interesting at the very, very bottom there is Taylor Floyd, who
I didn't recognize that name when I saw it.
Yeah. So the weird thing about him is he's like a sidearm like reliever.
Okay.
There was a time when he was in the fall league. I think it would have been end of 2021 and looked like he was a slam dunk big league relief piece who was going to be a major leaguer the following season. And then something happened during off-season workouts where like the bullpen, the indoor facility in which he was throwing did not have enough room for him to like get to his sidearm release point. Like it wasn't wide enough. And so subconsciously he changed his release point just so that he wasn't like running into the wall at this indoor facility at the bullpen he was throwing in. And he came back to Brewers spring training in 22 with a totally different release point. And he was terrible. Like, walked a guy per inning basically at the start of 2022. And so like he's had to be totally broken down from scratch and like rebuilt. For a while earlier this year, it seemed like things were back. And he's like struggling since he's become a Twin, but like that's an interesting like sleeper to watch at the very bottom of the system. It's not like sexy upside. So many of the guys who I have at the bottom of the system are like either very low probability flyers or low impact, high probability utility arms. Just like up down relievers who are close and older, like in their mid-20s. Everyone needs those guys. Pro scouting departments care about those guys. For like the Rays care about those guys so much. Like they're operating on the fringe of their roster all the time. So that's like the Travis Adams, Cody Lawyerson, Jordan Brink, Andrew Morris group. But yeah, like I think, the younger dudes who are maybe not quite so highly ranked in other publications because they're so deep in the system, like at the lower levels, I mean, those guys will be in the 40 plus future value tier or above for me, right? Like I want to price that upside into where they're lined up. And so like Yasser Mercedes isn't in the bottom half of the system or anything like that. I guess like Ricardo Olivar is an interesting name in the bottom half of the system, but Yasser Mercedes in Fort Myers in April, holy crap, did that guy look good? Like it wouldn't surprise me if he's a top 100 prospect a year from now, if we're looking
collecting
12 months
cards
out.
wise. So
yeah. I mean, holy cow, dude. Like he's not as projectable as a typical 18-and-a-half-year-old, but he can really swing it. Like, wow. Big bat speed there. So that whole group of him, Henry Chivilly in the DSL and Ariel Castro, both those guys.
Yeah, I saw those guys high on your list.
Yeah, they're big game hunting, I think, and I think some of the international process has changed for them over the last couple of years. Certainly, like when they hired Kevin Goldstein away from us, part of why Kevin was hired was to like help with international process oriented stuff that they wanted to shift toward. Like they liked the way Houston was doing it, I guess, when Kevin was there, and they wanted to take some of that into consideration. I think like with those guys, Castro and Chivilly, that you're already starting to see some of that bear fruit, at least in the way scouts are talking about them playing in the DR.
Right. So before we go, I just got to mention 20 years ago today, Twins fall to the Orioles. Rick Reed with a complete game loss, 5 earned runs. We don't see those too much nowadays. But no. Baltimore Orioles, the 3 pitchers, to me, this is like remembering some Orioles pitchers. Rodrigo Lopez, BJ Ryan. And do you remember who closed for that team? Righty threw the crap out of the ball.
Let me think. It's 03 Twins.
And Orioles.
Oh, and Orioles.
He had 27 saves. So
Armando Benitez?
That's where I was going too, but I'm thinking it's like the second coming of Armando Benitez. Initials JJ. Two first names.
Jorge Julio?
Jorge Julio, we got it. That's
Mm.
awesome, man. Well, hey, thank you so much. I love having that little bit of trivia in the shows and stuff. Thank you
That's
so much.
the wheelhouse, baby. I'm 14 going on 15 years old, and so all that is like.
Yep. So we're men of a
baked in
certain
their
age then. With that said, that's a wrap. Thanks, Eric, and you can follow him at Longenhagen. Thanks for hanging out with all of you at Locked On Twins, at Locked On MIN. If you want to follow our network at Brandon_Warren. Subscribe, give us a 5-star review on whatever platform you're listening on. Give us that thumbs up and subscribe on YouTube, all that fun stuff. Otherwise, this is Brandon Warren signing off saying thank you so much. And don't forget to stop by a little later today. I'll have my 5 favorite Joe Mauer moments in honor of him making the Hall of Fame. This is Locked On Twins.